From the dawn of civilization, humanity has craved answers to the great mysteries of existence. Who are we? Where do we come from? And where are we going? A man once walked the earth, carrying a message with the power to free minds and transform hearts. His name was Jesus. But if his message was so pure and revolutionary, why was it distorted over the centuries? Who stood to gain from reshaping his story according to their own agenda? And even more intriguing, what connection exists between the secret society of the Illuminati and the suppression of these teachings throughout history? Today, we will dive deep into this enigma and unravel the secrets that few dare to question. The figure of Jesus became the center of one of the world's largest religions, but what did he truly preach? To understand this, we must look beyond the doctrines imposed by tradition and delve into the essence of his words. He did not come to establish a religion. His message spoke of love, awareness, spiritual awakening, and the power of truth. However, just a few years after his death, his words began to be shaped by those who wanted to establish power and influence. The first attempts to institutionalize his message arose, and with them, control over the minds of the masses. Whoever holds the narrative holds the power. History shows us that knowledge has always been a valuable tool. Whoever controls information controls society. This is precisely what happened with the teachings of Jesus. His concepts of spiritual freedom and a direct connection with the divine threatened the religious and political leaders of the time. If people understood that the kingdom of God was within them, why would they need intermediaries? Why would they depend on dogmas and hierarchical structures? This thought was too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Thus, his message was carefully re-edited, censored, and modified to fit the interests of the powerful. But who were these manipulators? In the following centuries, various secret orders emerged to protect or distort this knowledge. The Illuminati, a society shrouded in mystery and conspiracy theories, are often mentioned in this context. Were they trying to preserve the truth, or were they just another group seeking power? The answer is not so simple. What we know is that many secret societies, including the Gnostics and the Illuminati themselves, sought to understand the true nature of reality, often confronting traditional religious institutions. What did they discover, and why was there so much fear surrounding their ideas? This leads us to a central question. How much of the history we know has been shaped to serve specific interests? Over the centuries, religious councils decided which texts could be included in the Bible and which should be destroyed. Apocryphal gospels were banned, and those who questioned the official versions were persecuted as heretics. This happened countless times in history, from the early centuries of Christianity to the persecution of philosophers and scientists in the Middle Ages. What else has been hidden from us? How many secrets are still buried, waiting to be revealed? If we observe carefully, we will see patterns repeating throughout history. Knowledge has always been power. Controlling spirituality has always been one of the main mechanisms of domination. When humanity approaches a deeper truth, hidden forces come into action to divert, distort, or seal this wisdom. It was so with Jesus, and it was so with many other thinkers and spiritual leaders. This raises a disturbing question. Are we living in a grand, manufactured illusion? Today, the manipulation of information does not only occur within religion. It is everywhere, in the media, in education, in politics, and in science. What we consider absolute truth often turns out to be nothing more than a reflection of a carefully constructed reality, designed to keep us within certain boundaries. If we delve deeper, we will realize that Jesus' struggle against the system of his time was not much different from the struggle of modern thinkers against the forces trying to keep humanity asleep. The most intriguing question is, why so much fear of the truth? If Jesus' teachings were left in their original form, without edits and interference, how would this change humanity? Would we still live in a world where the few control the many? Would the power structure we know crumble? Perhaps that is why there are so many efforts to keep the population distracted, divided, and disconnected from their true essence. But there is good news. The awakening has already begun. Every day, more people are questioning the official versions of history. More individuals are seeking the truth for themselves, without intermediaries. And technology has made access to knowledge easier. What was once hidden is now beginning to emerge. The veil is being lifted, and those in control know it. That is why they are desperately trying to reinforce the narratives that uphold their power structures. But will it be too late? In the next parts of this video, we will delve even deeper into this investigation. We will explore what Jesus truly taught, what was distorted, and how secret societies like the Illuminati played a role in this grand game of control. Are you ready to uncover the truth? The journey has just begun. To understand the real impact of Jesus and why his message was so distorted, we need to return to his essence. What did he really teach? Contrary to what many institutionalized religions preach, Jesus did not come to establish a rigid doctrine or an oppressive system of rules. His goal was much deeper, to awaken humanity to its true divine nature. He spoke of the kingdom of God as something internal, accessible to all who sought the truth within themselves. He did not preach fear, guilt, or submission to religious authorities. He spoke of freedom, love, and a direct connection with the Creator. And it was precisely this message that made him a threat to the established powers. The words of Jesus challenged everything that was considered normal in his time. He confronted religious leaders who imposed harsh dogmas and manipulated people through guilt and fear. He taught that each individual could access the truth for themselves, without the need for intermediaries. This idea was too dangerous to be accepted by those who ruled under the belief that only they could interpret the divine will. If people realized they were free and divine by nature, how could they be controlled? This was the great threat that Jesus represented, not to the people, but to those who benefited from collective ignorance. Throughout the centuries, the idea of an external, distant, and punitive God has been reinforced. This directly contradicts the original teachings of Jesus. He never said that connection with God required lavish temples, complex rituals, or the mediation of religious leaders. On the contrary, he taught that God was within each of us. This view was very similar to what many ancient spiritual traditions already knew, including the Essenes and the Gnostics, who saw the divine as an inner experience, accessible through self-knowledge and spiritual practice. But this message was not convenient for those who wished to build empires based on religion. Shortly after his crucifixion, the first attempts to restructure his teachings began, aiming to align them with the political and social needs of rulers. During the Roman Empire, for example, the figure of Jesus was shaped in a way that strengthened the authority of the state and the church, transforming his liberating message into a system of moral and social control. What was once a call to spiritual freedom became a code of strict rules that favored blind obedience. Many Gospels that contained deeper teachings were systematically excluded from the official Bible. The Gospel of Thomas, one of the texts discovered in Nag Hammadi, contains words attributed to Jesus that reinforce the power of self-knowledge. In one passage, he says, "He who knows himself will know the Father." This idea was unacceptable to a structure that wanted to centralize power. After all, if people didn't need intermediaries to reach God, what would be the need for a religious institution to control them? In addition to the Gospel of Thomas, other apocryphal texts offer alternative views on the teachings of Jesus. They speak about the importance of inner wisdom, the pursuit of hidden knowledge, and the need to question established structures. It is no coincidence that these writings were banned, and those who followed these ideas were often persecuted and many times eradicated. Groups like the Cathars and the Knights Templar, who attempted to preserve these teachings, were brutally wiped out by the religious and political authorities of their time. The question is, why? The answer is both simple and disturbing. Jesus was killed not merely for challenging the religious leaders of his time, but because he represented a direct threat to the prevailing power system. He taught that the true temple was not made of stone, but of the human being itself. He showed that no one needed kings or priests to connect with God. He challenged the idea that faith should serve power, and for this reason, his message had to be modified over the centuries to serve interests very different from those he originally preached. But traces of his true message are still present. If we look closely, we will realize that many of his words speak of awakening, of looking beyond illusion and seeking the truth within. He spoke of a kingdom that was not of this world, but could be found by those who had eyes to see and ears to hear. This aligns much more with profound spiritual teachings than with a simple institutionalized religious doctrine. This leads us to an even greater mystery. If Jesus' real message was about enlightenment and awakening, how do the Illuminati fit into this story? Did they try to preserve this wisdom, Or did they too fall into the trap of power and manipulation? The relationship between secret societies and spiritual knowledge is a subject shrouded in mystery. Some of these orders have sought to protect what was lost, while others may have used this knowledge for dark purposes. If we look at the history of the Illuminati, we see that their origin is linked to the pursuit of knowledge and the fight against ignorance. However, over time, the very concept of secret societies has been distorted, generating both conspiracy theories and hidden truths that are hard to unravel. What is certain is that the battle for control of information is not new. From the time of Jesus to the present day, there have always been those who seek to enlighten humanity and those who want to keep it in the dark. But what now? How can we recover the true essence of what Jesus taught? The first step is to question the official narratives. We must go beyond what has been imposed over the centuries and seek the truth directly from the source. The apocryphal Gospels, ancient texts, and even the connections between different spiritual traditions can provide clues about what was really taught and why so much effort was made to hide it. Spirituality does not need to be a control system. It can be a path to liberation. What Jesus brought was a call for inner transformation, something that cannot be framed within dogmas or fixed rules. True faith is not about submission, but understanding. It does not demand fear, but awareness. And perhaps it is exactly this awareness that the modern world still tries to avoid at all costs. This leads us to the next question. What was the real role of the Illuminati in this story? Were they trying to preserve hidden knowledge, or did they simply become another group using it to maintain power? In Part 3, we will delve deep into the origin of the Illuminati and the connection between secret societies and forbidden knowledge. The truth may be far more surprising than you imagine. Throughout history, secret groups have emerged and disappeared, always involved in mysteries and conspiracy theories. But few names arouse as much curiosity as the Illuminati. For many, they are the architects of global control, manipulating governments, religions, and the economy. For others, they were truth seekers, trying to preserve forbidden knowledge from the hands of those who wanted to monopolize power. But what is the connection between the Illuminati and the original message of Jesus? Did they try to protect his teachings, or were they just another group that distorted them to serve their own interests? To understand this relationship, we need to go back in time and analyze the origin of this group. The term Illuminati means the enlightened ones, suggesting a quest for truth and wisdom. The Bavarian Illuminati, founded in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt, was a group of intellectuals and philosophers who opposed the church and state's control over knowledge. They believed that humanity should be guided by reason, not by the fear imposed by religious institutions. However, this was not the first manifestation of this type of society. Since ancient times, mystery schools and occult societies have preserved esoteric knowledge that challenged the status quo. But what does this have to do with Jesus? If we look closely, we will see a historical pattern. Knowledge has always been controlled by elites who feared its dissemination. Jesus' teachings spoke of enlightenment and the awakening of consciousness, concepts similar to the principles followed by secret societies throughout the centuries. The Gnostics, for example, were a group that saw Jesus not as a figure of worship, but as a teacher who taught the path of spiritual liberation. For them, the truth was hidden within each individual, accessible only through knowledge and self-awareness. This view was considered heretical and was eradicated by the early councils of the Church. When Christianity was institutionalized by the Roman Empire, the teachings of Jesus were shaped to reinforce the authority of the state. The concept of an inner God was replaced by the idea of an external, distant, and punitive God. This was not just a theological shift, but a political strategy. A people who believe they need intermediaries to connect with the divine become easier to control. The elite of the time understood this perfectly, and since then, secret societies have emerged, both to preserve and to manipulate this knowledge. The Illuminati, at least in their original conception, seemed to be among those who sought to preserve forbidden knowledge. They opposed the Church's censorship, promoted freedom of thought, and wanted a world where reason and personal enlightenment were accessible to all. But just like what happened with the teachings of Jesus, the history of this group was also shrouded in distortions. By the end of the 18th century, the Illuminati were hunted down and seemingly wiped out. However, Many believe that their influence never disappeared, but rather infiltrated other societies and organizations. The problem is that knowledge, when kept secret by small groups, can be used to either liberate or enslave. The real question is not just who owns the knowledge, but how it is used. If the Illuminati sought to enlighten humanity, why did they remain hidden? If they were merely philosophers and intellectuals, why were they pursued with such brutality? Could it be possible that within these societies, there were factions with completely opposite objectives, some trying to preserve the truth while others manipulated it for their own benefit? What we know for sure is that throughout history, groups holding forbidden knowledge have always been the target of persecution. The Vatican itself, for centuries, maintained a secret archive containing documents that could rewrite everything we know about the history of Christianity. The Church has always been interested in maintaining the official version of events, and any alternative narrative was systematically eradicated. This leads to another question. Did the Illuminati try to challenge this information monopoly? If we examine certain aspects of the Enlightenment, a philosophical movement that advocated for reason and knowledge as the basis for freedom, we will see interesting parallels with the teachings of Jesus. The emphasis on critical thinking, the pursuit of truth, and the fight against ignorance are principles shared by both. However, the major difference is that the Illuminati operated in the shadows, while Jesus spread his message openly, directly challenging the powers of his time. This explains why his crucifixion was a necessity for those who wished to silence his voice. The Illuminati, knowing the history and risks of a direct confrontation, preferred to act discreetly. But did this discretion lead to corruption? Some theories suggest that over time, the Illuminati transitioned from an organization of enlightened thinkers to a manipulative elite, controlling society from behind the scenes. According to this view, the group would have abandoned its original ideals, turning into a hidden force using secret knowledge to maintain power over the masses. If this is true, it means that the message of Jesus and the spiritual knowledge the Illuminati sought to preserve have been distorted once again, only this time in the hands of those who were supposed to protect them. And here we arrive at a dilemma. For centuries, both the teachings of Jesus and esoteric knowledge have been targets of censorship and manipulation. Those who dared to challenge the official narrative were persecuted, eliminated, or turned into the villains of history. But what if there is a third way? What if, instead of blindly trusting religious institutions or secret societies, true enlightenment is available to those who seek it for themselves? This could be the answer to one of humanity's greatest mysteries. Knowledge has never belonged to a single organization, be it religious or secret. It has always been within us. However, there is one final point that we cannot ignore. The battle for knowledge continues to this day. Censorship, misinformation, and manipulation are still part of modern reality. What has changed is the way it occurs. Instead of burning books and persecuting thinkers, today's manipulation is more subtle, carried out through the media, mass culture, and the trivialization of spirituality. The real danger is not just forbidden knowledge, but the ability to perceive that it has been hidden. If we want to understand the impact of Jesus' original message and the role of secret societies in history, we need to ask the right questions. Who benefits from ignorance? Who profits from keeping people in a state of spiritual dependence? And most importantly, what can we do to reclaim this wisdom and apply it in our lives today? Because when all is said and done, true enlightenment has never been in the Illuminati or in religions. It has always been in those who have the courage to seek the truth for themselves. In Part 4, we will explore how religion was transformed into a tool of control, manipulating not only spirituality, but the very perception of reality itself. Are you ready to discover how all of this impacts your life to this day? From ancient times, spirituality has always been present in human life as a means of connecting with the divine and achieving self-knowledge. However, something changed throughout history. What began as a quest for enlightenment and truth was gradually turned into an instrument of social and psychological control. Institutionalized religion became a tool to shape behaviors, impose rules, and above all, limit freedom of thought. But how did this happen? How was a message of love and awakening like that of Jesus modified to serve the interests of those who wanted to keep the population submissive? To understand this transformation, we need to look at how religion was structured. When we study the teachings of Jesus in their essence, we realize that his message was liberating. He taught that the kingdom of God is within each of us and that the connection with the divine did not require temples, priests, or rituals. He preached love, compassion, and most importantly, spiritual freedom. However, after his crucifixion, those who took over his story had very different interests. Christianity was institutionalized and shaped to fit into a centralized power system. The first major step in this transformation occurred in the 4th century when Emperor Constantine converted the Roman Empire to Christianity. But this conversion was not based on genuine faith. It was a political move. Christianity, once persecuted, would now be the official religion of the empire. However, to serve the interests of the state, it needed to be altered. Jesus ceased to be the master of awakening and became a mythological figure, adapted to the needs of imperial power. His message was edited, reinterpreted, and distorted, creating a system where the church became the intermediary between God and the faithful. The manipulation did not stop there. In the following centuries, various councils were organized to determine which texts would be accepted as part of the Bible and which would be considered heretical. Gospels that reinforced individual power and self-knowledge were excluded, while those that emphasized obedience and submission were kept. This selection of texts was not made based on spiritual criteria, but on political ones. The goal was not to preserve the truth, but to create a narrative that would strengthen the power of the church and the state. The creation of the concept of eternal hell was one of the greatest tools of control. Jesus spoke of inner transformation, but the church used his figure to implant the idea of fear and eternal punishment. If people believed they needed the church to be saved, then its authority would be absolute. The fear of divine punishment became the greatest weapon to keep the population obedient. Instead of encouraging people to seek God within themselves, religion began to sell salvation as an exclusive privilege for those who followed its rules. But the control did not stop at faith. Religion began to define social, economic, and political norms. Marriage, sexuality, education, and even the way people thought were shaped by religious dogmas. Any critical thinking that questioned this structure was suppressed. Scientists, philosophers, and mystics were persecuted, tortured, and killed for daring to challenge the monopoly on knowledge. The goal was clear: to maintain absolute control over society. The Illuminati and other secret societies emerged precisely in this context. While the church imposed its limited view of reality, occult groups tried to preserve forbidden knowledge. The paradox is that Jesus' own message was used to oppress rather than liberate. Institutionalized religion discouraged the personal pursuit of truth and imposed rules that benefited those at the top of the hierarchy. Religious leaders became the sole interpreters of God's will, turning faith into a tool for mass domination. But the most shocking thing is that this control system has not ended. It has simply adapted. Today, in the 21st century, we still live under the remnants of this structure. Fear, guilt, and blind obedience continue to be encouraged, not only by religions, but also by political, educational, and media systems. The manipulation of information persists, now with the help of technology and mass culture. However, something is changing. Each day, more people begin to question the official narrative. The collective awakening is underway, and truths that have been hidden for centuries are starting to emerge. The dogmas that were once accepted without question are now being challenged. People are realizing that they don't need intermediaries to access the divine, and this poses a real threat to those who have always controlled humanity through ignorance. The question we should ask now is, how can we reclaim this wisdom and free ourselves from the control system? The answer lies in the pursuit of self-knowledge, the courage to question, and the reconnection with our true essence. Spirituality does not have to be a tool of control. It can be a path to liberation. To achieve this, it is essential to let go of fear, understand that we don't need anyone to connect us to the divine, and most importantly, reclaim the forgotten wisdom that has always been within us. Our next step in this journey will be to delve into what has been hidden from humanity. In Part 5, we will explore the forbidden texts, the apocryphal manuscripts, and the information that was deliberately concealed to prevent the true message of Jesus from reaching us. What do these texts reveal? Why were they banned? And how can they completely change our understanding of spirituality? The truth is closer than ever, but are we ready to accept it? History has always been written by the victors, and when it comes to spirituality, it was no different. Over the centuries, texts were destroyed, rewritten, and hidden to ensure that only one version of the truth was accepted. But what if I told you there are ancient records that reveal a completely different side of Jesus' story and his teachings? Texts that were deliberately excluded from the Bible because they contained truths that threaten the power of religious authorities. Today, we will explore the apocryphal manuscripts, the forbidden gospels, and the information that was buried so you would never discover the true essence of Jesus' message. To begin, we need to understand how the sacred texts were organized. The Bible we know today is just a selection of writings that underwent a rigorous process of editing and exclusion. In the 4th century, the Council of Nicaea determined which books would be part of the New Testament and which would be rejected. This process was not based solely on spiritual criteria, but on political and strategic interests. Any gospel that suggested a different understanding of the Christian faith or challenged the authority of the church was classified as heretical and destroyed. But surprisingly, some of these texts survived. Among the most revealing documents are the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, discovered in Egypt in 1945. These texts, buried for nearly 2,000 years, contain information that could completely change our understanding of Jesus and his message. One of the most impactful is the Gospel of Thomas, a text that contains phrases attributed to Jesus, but which bring a very different perspective from what we find in the traditional Gospels. In it, Jesus says, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This suggests that the true spiritual quest is not about following external rules or obeying a religious institution, but rather looking within and awakening the knowledge that already exists within us. This idea, that the divine dwells within each human being, is a direct threat to any system that depends on the control and submission of people. Another essential text found among the manuscripts is the Gospel of Philip, which suggests that Jesus taught a secret knowledge to those who were ready to understand it. This knowledge spoke about the nature of reality, the awakening of consciousness, and the true meaning of enlightenment. But why were these teachings erased from history? Simple, because they empowered the individual and eliminated the need for intermediaries. In addition to the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, there is another discovery that shook the traditional narrative, the Dead Sea Scrolls, found in 1947. These texts belong to the Essenes, a mystical community that lived during the time of Jesus and had teachings very similar to those he preached. The Essenes believed in a direct connection with the divine, without the need for temples or priests. They practiced meditation, fasting, and sought self-knowledge as a way to ascend spiritually. Interestingly, this way of life aligns much more with Jesus' teachings than the rigid structure that the church has imposed over the centuries. But the most astonishing thing is that these texts reveal a Jesus very different from the one we were introduced to. He was not just a moralistic preacher, but rather a master of mysteries, a guide to enlightenment, and a defender of spiritual freedom. His message was not about following dogmas or fearing hell. On the contrary, he taught that humanity's greatest obstacle is ignorance itself. He didn't want to create followers, but rather spiritual leaders, individuals capable of connecting with the divine on their own. The big question is, why was all this hidden? If these Gospels and manuscripts contain authentic words from Jesus, why were they deliberately excluded? The answer is clear: knowledge is power. If people realized that they already have everything they need within themselves to connect with God, they would stop relying on the church, on religious leaders, and on institutions that dictate what one should or shouldn't believe. This would mean the end of the spiritual and psychological control that has been imposed on humanity for centuries. What is even more fascinating is that when studying these texts, we realize that Jesus' teachings have striking similarities with other spiritual traditions, such as Buddhism, Hinduism, and even the esoteric schools of ancient Egypt and Greece. He spoke about awakening consciousness, transcending illusion, and finding the kingdom of God within. This universal spiritual approach is completely different from the dogmatic narrative that was constructed after his death. The Illuminati and other secret societies may have tried to preserve this knowledge throughout the centuries, but did they really protect this wisdom, Or did they end up using it for their own purposes? This is one of the greatest mysteries in history. We know that occult groups kept forbidden records and that at certain times, they tried to challenge the church's domination over knowledge. However, we also know that some of these societies ended up becoming new forms of control, using the same knowledge that was supposed to liberate to keep people trapped in another illusion. This leads us to a disturbing conclusion. True spiritual knowledge has always been available, but it was deliberately hidden. While the world was taught to seek God outside of themselves, the holders of knowledge knew that the real secret was within each human being. While most were indoctrinated with fear and guilt, a few accessed teachings that could completely transform the way we live and understand reality. But now, this truth is coming to light. With the advancement of technology and the spread of information, the barriers that kept these teachings hidden are starting to fall. Access to these forbidden texts has never been easier, and more people are starting to realize that the history we were told has been carefully edited to keep us in a limited reality. The question now is, what do we do with this information? How can we reclaim the forgotten wisdom and use it to recover our true connection with the divine? The answer is not in following yet another system or accepting another imposed narrative. It lies in seeking the truth on your own, questioning, reflecting, and exploring the original teachings without fear. Our next step is to understand how the control of information has transformed over the centuries and continues to be used to keep us away from true knowledge. In Part 6, we will explore how modern manipulation is perpetuated through the media, science, and popular culture, and how this affects the way we perceive reality. Are we still being deceived? The truth is available, but are you ready to see it? The manipulation of information did not begin in the modern era. Since ancient times, kings, emperors, and priests understood that knowledge is power and that the best way to control a society is not just through force, but through narrative. For centuries, religion was used to shape the thoughts of the masses, concealing spiritual truths and turning faith into a tool of domination. But what about today? If religious dogmas were once the primary instruments of manipulation, what are the forces that control the way we see the world today? The answer lies in the way information is distributed, filtered, and distorted in the modern age. What many fail to realize is that the control strategy has not disappeared, it has simply adapted. Today, the media, the educational system, and popular culture itself play the role that was once exclusive to religious institutions. The narratives we receive are not neutral. They are constructed to shape our beliefs, influence our choices, and limit our vision of reality. But how does this happen? The first step to understanding this manipulation is to observe who controls the information. Most major media outlets, tech companies, and publishers belong to a very small number of corporations and influence groups. This means that what we see, read, and hear daily has already gone through filters that determine what can or cannot be accepted. This structure allows certain discourses to be amplified while others are suppressed, exactly like what happened with the prohibited texts that were removed from the Bible centuries ago. Science and history also do not escape this mechanism. Despite being pillars of human knowledge, these areas are often limited by financial and political interests. How many technological advancements have been suppressed because they would threaten major industries? How many archaeological discoveries have been ignored because they did not fit into the official version of history? What was once burned at the stake by the Inquisition now simply disappears from the news or never reaches the public. And the most impressive thing is that this modern manipulation system no longer depends on brute force. It operates through distraction, entertainment, and information overload. In the past, the strategy was to prevent knowledge from reaching people. Today, the approach is to flood society with so much irrelevant information that it becomes difficult to distinguish what is essential from what is pure noise. While the masses are busy with media scandals, manufactured ideological disputes, and constant distractions, the real secrets about the nature of reality remain hidden. And here is a crucial point. The trivialization of spirituality is part of this system. The true spiritual knowledge, the one that Jesus and other masters tried to convey, has been replaced by a superficial and commercialized version. The quest for inner awakening has been reduced to dogmas, magic formulas, and a spirituality of fast consumption. This is no coincidence. The system understands that the greatest danger to the power structure is an awakened, conscious, and free humanity. Therefore, the strategy now is to promote diluted versions of spirituality, which seem profound but do not encourage real questioning or true transformation. But perhaps the biggest blow of this modern control is the concept of reality itself. Think about it. How do we know the world is the way we think it is? Everything we know comes from external sources: media, books, schools, religions, culture. But who established the boundaries of reality? Who decided what is possible and what isn't? Just as in the past we were made to believe that we needed priests to connect us to God, today we are made to believe that we need authorities to define what is real and what isn't. And here is where the role of secret societies comes in. The Illuminati and other occult orders have always understood that true spiritual and philosophical knowledge goes far beyond what is officially taught. But just like institutionalized religion, these societies have also undergone internal divisions. Some sought to preserve the truth, while others used this knowledge to maintain control. If there's anything that history teaches us, it's that there isn't a single organization or group that holds the entire truth. Because the truth cannot be owned, only discovered. But if the system is structured to keep us in ignorance, how can we liberate ourselves? The first step is to understand that the power has always been within us. This is exactly what Jesus taught, but this truth was deliberately removed from his words. He never said that salvation depended on an intermediary or an institution. On the contrary, he said that the kingdom of God was within us, waiting to be discovered. The second key to liberation is learning to question. Modern manipulation relies on the passive acceptance of imposed narratives. If in the past people were taught not to question religion, today they are taught not to question science, history, or the official versions of events. Critical thinking has become a threat, but true awakening begins when we start to ask, what if everything we've been told isn't exactly as it seems? And the third step, perhaps the most important one, is to reconnect with intuition and inner knowledge. In a world where information can be manipulated, the only truth that cannot be distorted is the one that comes from within. Ancient masters knew this. The apocryphal manuscripts talk about this direct connection with the divine. Secret societies, in their origin, also sought to preserve this understanding. And today, more than ever, it is essential to rediscover this ability. This leads us to a final question. Is there still a path for humanity to escape this control system? We are living in a period of transition, where more people are awakening to the reality of manipulation. But this also means that the forces controlling information are doubling their efforts to keep the masses distracted. We are in the midst of a battle for human consciousness, where the greatest weapon is knowledge. In Part 7, we will explore how we can reclaim the true essence of spiritual teachings and how each of us can break the chains of illusion. How can we regain a direct connection with the truth and avoid falling into the traps of modern misinformation? Is there a real path to spiritual liberation? The answer can completely change the way you see the world. If there is one universal truth that has been hidden from humanity over the centuries, it is this: you are more powerful than you have been led to believe. All the manipulations, all the distortions, and all forms of control have always had one single goal: to keep people ignorant of their true nature. But what if there was a path to freedom? What if there was a way to reclaim lost knowledge and finally awaken to the reality that has always been within your reach? In this part, we will explore the path to liberation, reconnecting with the true essence of spirituality, and how each of us can escape from the control matrix that was constructed to keep us in the dark. The first key to this liberation lies in self-knowledge. This is something that Jesus repeatedly taught, but which has been systematically erased from his message over the centuries. In texts such as the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus makes it clear that the search for truth is not in external dogmas, but rather within each individual. He says, "He who knows himself will know the Father." In other words, the connection with the divine does not come from blind obedience to religious rules or submission to an institution, but rather from internal exploration, from discovering one's own essence. The problem is that we live in a world designed to distance us from ourselves. From a young age, we are taught to seek answers outside, to trust external authorities, and to doubt our own intuition. School teaches us what to think, but not how to think. The media tells us what we should value but does not encourage us to question. Religion promises us future salvation but does not teach us how to awaken in the present. This disconnection is the biggest obstacle to true liberation. The second key is to deprogram limiting beliefs. Many of the ideas we carry about ourselves and the world have been implanted by a system that relies on our limitations. We were taught to believe that we are small, that we need permission to access the sacred, that we are unworthy sinners, or that success depends on external factors. But these are merely narratives created to keep us submissive. The reality is that power has always been within us. We were just made to forget it. True spiritual masters have never asked for worship. Jesus did not want blind followers. He wanted awakened individuals, capable of understanding their own divinity. The same goes for figures like Buddha, Lao Tzu, and other wise men in history. None of them tried to centralize power within themselves. On the contrary, they showed that every human being has the ability to access truth directly. But this knowledge was systematically hidden because it meant the end of mass control. The third key to liberation is reconnecting with intuition and inner knowledge. In a world where everything can be manipulated, from information to the perception of reality, the only truth that cannot be distorted is the one that comes from within. Our thoughts, emotions, and perceptions have been conditioned throughout life to fit into a predetermined system. But when we learn to silence the external noise and listen to our inner voice, we begin to access a level of knowledge that cannot be found in any book or institution. And this is where secret societies come into play again. The Illuminati and other occult orders have always understood that there is a higher knowledge that is not accessible to those who live only on the surface of existence. Some of these societies have sought to preserve this wisdom, while others may have used this knowledge to maintain control. But what is most important to understand is that no one has a monopoly on the truth. This knowledge does not belong to a specific organization. It has always been available to those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. But how to recover this connection? How to escape the traps of modern control? The answer lies in practices that allow direct access to the truth without relying on intermediaries. Here are some of the most effective ways to start this process. Meditation and introspection. Quieting the mind and observing your own thoughts allows you to see the belief patterns that have been implanted throughout your life. Over time, you learn to distinguish what truly comes from you and what has been programmed by the system. Reading forbidden texts and forgotten knowledge. The apocryphal Gospels, ancient manuscripts, and even Eastern philosophies offer a very different view of spirituality. Exploring these sources can help reconstruct the true message that has been hidden. Practice of self-observation. Instead of just automatically reacting to everyday situations, start observing your own emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. Ask yourself, why do I think this way? Does this come from me? Or was it implanted by something external? Contact with nature. Many ancient traditions spoke about the importance of reconnecting with natural elements. Nature was not created by human hands, and its energy can help restore our original frequency before we were programmed by the system. Disconnecting from the dominant narrative. This doesn't mean completely ignoring the outside world, but rather being selective with the information you consume. Not everything that is taught in schools, shown in the media, or presented as absolute truth reflects reality. Learn to question. But perhaps the most important question is, what happens when a sufficient number of people awaken? If there's anything history shows us, it's that there have always been massive efforts to prevent this awakening. But now we are living in a unique moment. For the first time, the tools to access this forbidden knowledge are within reach of millions of people. The internet, previously banned books, and global connections allow the emerging truth to spread rapidly. And it's precisely for this reason that there's such a strong attempt to reinforce control over the narrative. This leads us to the final question. Is collective awakening possible? If more people start seeking the truth for themselves, questioning imposed structures, and reconnecting with their true essence, then the whole control system loses power. The real secret was never in hidden hands or secret societies. It has always been within each of us. But are we ready to take on this responsibility? In Part 8, we will explore the future of humanity and the final battle for consciousness. We are living in a crucial moment in history, where opposing forces attempt to decide the fate of civilization. Will we continue to be manipulated, or will we finally awaken to our true potential? What is at stake now is much more than just beliefs or theories. It's the very nature of reality. The question now is, are you ready to see beyond what you've been programmed to believe? The Knights Templar officially disappeared in the 14th century, but there are indications that their secrets remain alive and are being kept behind the scenes of history. Centuries after their fall, we are living in one of the most decisive periods in human history. What was once hidden is coming to light, and the battle for consciousness has never been so intense. On one side are the forces that have controlled information, distorted spirituality, and manipulated the perception of reality for centuries. On the other is an increasing number of people who are awakening to the fact that everything we have been taught may not be exactly as it seems. But where will this lead us? Is humanity about to break the chains of control, or are we heading towards a new cycle of domination? The awakening of consciousness is not an abstract concept. It's a real phenomenon that is already happening. Millions of people around the world are questioning traditional narratives and seeking knowledge beyond what has been imposed. Science, history, and spirituality are being reviewed and reinterpreted under a new light. Technology, which for a long time was used as a tool of control, has now become a means by which hidden truths can be instantly shared. But this change does not come without resistance. Just like in ancient times, the guardians of the system know that their power depends on collective ignorance, and they will do everything to keep humanity distracted and divided. One of the biggest challenges of this awakening is modern manipulation. Never before has misinformation been so effective. If previously knowledge was concealed through censorship and the destruction of records, today the strategy is different. Flood society with so many conflicting pieces of information that it becomes difficult to distinguish what is true and what is a lie. This deliberate confusion keeps people tied to distractions, conflicts, and polarizations, preventing them from seeing what is really happening behind the scenes. But there is an even deeper factor in this game. The very nature of the reality we know may have been manipulated. And this leads us to the most intriguing question of all. Do we live within a constructed illusion? Since time immemorial, different spiritual traditions, from the Essenes to the Eastern Masters, have spoken about the world as a mind prison, a matrix created to keep souls trapped in endless cycles of suffering and limitation. If this idea is true, then the entire system, from religion to social structure, has been created to prevent humanity from reaching its true potential. What if the greatest hidden truth is that we have never truly been free? If the very structure of reality was built to keep humanity in a state of servitude, then liberation goes far beyond simply questioning governments or religions. It requires a profound internal transformation, a break from all the illusions that have been imposed on us. And this is exactly the journey that spiritual masters have tried to teach, but which has been systematically erased over the centuries. The Illuminati and other secret societies, in their origins, may have understood this mystery and attempted to preserve this knowledge. But could they have also fallen into the power trap over time? Instead of liberating humanity, might some of these groups have decided to use the hidden knowledge to perpetuate control? This is the big question that remains unanswered. But what we do know is that true knowledge has never belonged to a single organization. It has always been available to those who dare to seek it. If there's anything the past centuries have taught us, it's that any system seeking to centralize power over people's minds ends up corrupt, be it religion, governments, corporations, or even secret societies. Whenever a group assumes authority over the truth, this knowledge becomes a tool for domination. The only real way out is when each individual embarks on their own awakening journey, without relying on intermediaries. But how can this happen on a large scale? How can humanity, in fact, break this cycle of manipulation and access the truth? Here are some of the possibilities that could shape the future of our civilization. The rise of critical thinking. As more people begin to question the official version of events, the control system based on ignorance starts to crumble. The information age has brought challenges, but it has also opened the door for more individuals to investigate on their own, without relying on external authorities. The fall of traditional institutions, religions, governments, and education systems based on obedience are increasingly being challenged. The future may be marked by a decentralization of knowledge, where each individual is responsible for their own journey of learning and evolution. The rediscovery of lost knowledge, ancient manuscripts, forbidden texts, and previously hidden knowledge are re-emerging. Access to this material can provide insights that help us reconstruct the true history of humanity and recover the wisdom that was concealed. The end of fear as a control tool. For centuries, fear has been used as a weapon to manipulate the masses. Fear of divine punishment, fear of death, fear of the unknown. But what if, instead, humanity began to operate from consciousness and love? The shift from a fear-based paradigm to one based on freedom could be the key to collective awakening. The evolution of consciousness. If reality is indeed a manipulated construct, then the answer lies not only in external changes, but in a profound internal transformation. This means completely abandoning imposed narratives and seeking truth within oneself. But this revolution will not come without resistance. The system will not simply allow humanity to awaken without a fight. The rise of distractions, the reinforcement of deceptive narratives, and the use of technology for monitoring are just a few of the ways that will be used to try to stop this change. But the big question is, can they still contain this process? The future of humanity is at stake, and everything depends on which path the majority of people will decide to follow. If we continue to allow others to define our reality, we will be slaves to an invisible structure that has existed for centuries. But if each one of us takes control of our own consciousness, then we can finally escape the mental prison that has been built around us. We are about to enter the most critical phase of this battle for consciousness. What is happening now will determine the course of humanity for the next centuries. Will the truth finally be revealed, or will a new cycle of control be established, this time even more sophisticated and imperceptible? In Part 9, we reach the conclusion of this journey. Let's connect all the dots and understand what our next step as humanity might be. If liberation is truly possible, then what can each of us do to ensure that the awakening is irreversible? We are faced with a final choice: to accept the imposed reality or create a new one. The future is in our hands, but are we ready to take on this responsibility? We have reached the end point of this investigation. We've explored the hidden mysteries, the distortion of Jesus' message, the role of secret societies, and the ongoing battle for human consciousness. But now, in light of everything we've discovered, one question remains: what now? If the reality that has been presented to us has always been manipulated, if knowledge has been suppressed, and if hidden forces continue trying to keep us in ignorance, what can we do to reclaim our true freedom? The answer may be simpler than it seems. Everything starts within us. No matter how many control systems and manipulation mechanisms exist, no external force can enslave a mind that has awakened to its true nature. The greatest secret that has been hidden from humanity is not in forbidden manuscripts, hidden orders, or secret files. It lies within every human being who has the courage to look beyond the illusion. Since the beginning of time, there have been two paths: the path of ignorance and the path of knowledge. The first is easy, comfortable, and safe. It provides ready-made answers, external authority, and a sense of belonging. But in return, it demands submission. The second path is hard, challenging, and often lonely. It requires questioning, courage, and self-discipline. But in return, it offers freedom. And this has always been the great choice of humanity. The manipulation of religion, information, and the perception of reality has never been just about maintaining power. It's been about preventing humanity from consciously choosing the path of awakening. Because once someone sees the truth, there's no turning back. The veil falls, and the illusion loses its strength. And that's why the system fights so hard to keep people distracted. Fear, materialism, empty entertainment, polarizations, all of this exists to prevent people from doing the only thing that really matters: looking within. If Jesus was a spiritual master who tried to teach this path, if the Illuminati attempted to preserve this knowledge or use it for their own benefit, if history has been manipulated to keep us confined, in the end, none of this matters if each of us does not take responsibility for our own awakening. Because there are no saviors. No secret organization will liberate humanity. No spiritual leader will come to rescue those who passively wait. Liberation has never been an external event. It has always been an internal process. And this brings us to the most important point of this journey. What can we do from now on? How can we ensure that the awakening of humanity is not just another fleeting wave of interest, but rather a real and irreversible change? Here are some steps that anyone can take to escape manipulation and regain control over their own consciousness. 1. Take control of your own mind. If manipulation has always worked through narrative control, then the first thing to do is to become the master of your own mind. Question everything. Do not accept anything as absolute truth, not even the ideas that seem most comfortable. Critical thinking is the greatest weapon against illusion. 2. Reconnect with your intuition. Intuition has always been present, but we have been trained to ignore it. If there is a source of truth that cannot be manipulated, it is this inner voice that exists within each of us. The more you distance yourself from distractions and external noise, the stronger this connection becomes. 3. Free yourself from fear. Fear has always been the most powerful tool of control. Fear of hell, fear of death, fear of judgment, fear of the unknown. But when you realize that reality is much larger than this mental prison we've been taught, fear loses its power. And without fear, no one can be manipulated. 4. Seek knowledge for yourself. The forbidden texts, the forgotten philosophies, the hidden mysteries. All of this is available to anyone who wants to seek. But the truth is not just in books, it's in direct experience. If you want to understand reality, don't just read about it, live it. Try different forms of meditation, study various spiritual traditions, explore states of consciousness. Knowledge without practice is not real knowledge. 5. Become a living example of awakening. The best way to transform the world is not by trying to convince others, but by becoming a living example of someone who has freed themselves from the mental matrix. When one person awakens, it has a chain effect, because the truth has a power that resonates beyond words. Now, a crucial question. Can the system prevent this awakening? The answer is yes and no. Yes, because there are forces actively working to maintain distraction and control. But no, because no one can be forced to remain blind. It's always a choice. Each person who decides to look beyond the illusion strengthens the liberation movement. And this strength grows every day. But what if the system realizes it's losing control? What can happen? One of the most common strategies used throughout history was to subvert the awakening, turning it into something superficial and harmless. If many people start seeking the truth, it's possible that hidden forces may try to corrupt this movement, mixing truth with lies, promoting false leaders, or creating new forms of distraction. This has happened in the past, and it can happen again. Therefore, the ultimate answer to all of this is simple. Don't follow anyone. Don't accept leaders, gurus, or institutions as the sole source of truth. Take the information, analyze it, test it for yourself, and see what truly resonates with you. True liberation doesn't come from adhering to a new system. It comes from abandoning all systems and trusting in your own consciousness. Humanity is at a turning point. We can continue in the cycle of manipulation, accepting the imposed reality, or we can make a quantum leap in consciousness, breaking the shackles that have held us for centuries. This choice will not be made by governments, religions, or secret societies. It will be made by each one of us, individually. The future is open. Nothing is set in stone. But one thing is certain. The truth is available to those who are willing to see it. What you do with that truth is your choice. The fate of humanity will not be decided by hidden forces or manipulative elites. It will be decided by the level of consciousness of each person inhabiting this planet. The final question is, which path do you choose? Mind unfettered. Now I want to hear from you. After all that we've explored, which part of this journey resonated with you the most? What do you think is still being hidden from humanity? Share your vision in the comments. Remember, collective manifestation begins when we share knowledge. Each comment can be a pivotal piece in awakening more people. Let's make this space a meeting point for awakened minds that refuse to accept reality without questioning. And if you felt that this journey was just the beginning, the next step is waiting for you. There is a group that may have received the secret teachings of Jesus, and their influence may have reached far beyond what we imagine. Who were Christ's hidden disciples, and what forbidden knowledge did they carry? Click now on the video the secret disciples of Christ, unveiling hidden knowledge that is already on your screen and discover what they never wanted you to know. Blast off.